How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ches, Daf 8 of Masechet Kiddushin, friends. Friends. Alright, here's the deal. Here's the dealio. Some interesting stuff. We talk about there's like three chunks. The first chunk talks about being Mekadesh with Shaveh Kesef, which I think is interesting because I imagine that this is like similar to like what we do nowadays with the whole ring thing. So if I'm understanding correctly and making an accurate parallel between the first chunk of today's daf and being Mekadesh with a ring, that's pretty interesting. And then we talk about, if you're Mekadesh with the mana, but you give less and up front, a little bit technical and whatever, some other technical stuff. But the first part I think is particularly interesting. Okay, so let's start in Daf Zayin. So we got, by the way, big daf today, a lot to do. It might take some time. I don't know, we'll see, but we'll get through it. We're also, because I want to do a chunk on Tes Amud Aleph because it kind of wraps things up. It comes to a good conclusion there, but it's about half of Tes Amud Aleph, but it moves kind of quickly. And we are starting on Zayin Amud Beis, so it's not such a small daf. So we got work to do, friends. We got work to do, but it's not too difficult. Okay. So we can start in Daf Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines before it gets wide. So there's a fellow who's Mekadesh, a fellow with silks. Now, so you see, so the Gemara is talking about silks. I don't know, in my mind, I imagine that this should be similar to like what we do nowadays with the ring. It's something that is not, money, it's not currency, but it's something of value. It's an object. It's a thing of value. So you have you have a fellow who's mekadesh a woman with silks. Rabba Amar lo tzrichei shuma, Rav Yosef Amar tzrichei shuma. Okay, so Rabba says that you don't need to evaluate the silks to make sure that they are actually worth a shaveh pruta. Of course they are. Whereas Rav Yosef says, no, you need to evaluate them, even if you're sure that they're at least worth a pruta. Still, you have to get a professional appraisal to give an objective, quantifiable, absolute value to these silks. Okay, fine. Now, says the Gemara, if he simply says, Hariat Mikudeshesli, right? You are Mikudeshes to me with these silks, and that's all he says. So then even Rav Yosef would say you don't need to get that appraised, right? If he says you are Mikudeshes to me with these silks, they're definitely worth a shaveh pruta. You don't need to get them appraised. And if he says that I'm being Mekadesh you with these silks that are worth 50 zuz, but they're not actually worth 50 zuz, well then even Rabbah would say that's invalid. Right? If he says 50 zuz and he gives her something that's worth less than that, of course it does not work. So ki plige do amr chamshin v'shavu chamshin, where the machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Yosef about do you have to get appraised or not, is when he says, I'm being Mekadesh you with these silks that are worth 50 zuz. And they're in fact worth 50 zuz. So Rabba Amar lo tzrichei shuma da shavu chamshin. Rabba says, look, we don't need you to get a professional appraisal of these silks. Look, if you said I'm being Mekadesh you with 50 zuz worth of silks, and they're worth 50 zuz worth of silks, so the silks are worth 50 zuz, so she's Mikudeshes. Whereas if Yosef Amar tzrichei shuma kim deitza lo bekiya b'shuma lo samcha daita. Whereas Rav Yosef says, look, even if the silks are in fact worth 50 zuz, still you need to get the official appraisal because this fella who's being Mikudeshes, she's not an expert appraiser. Okay? And therefore, what does it say? She's lo samcha daita. She's not gonna, be all in. She's not gonna be totally bought in if she doesn't know that objectively these silks are in fact worth 50 zuz, right? This guy is saying, I'm being Mekadesh you with 50 zuz worth of silks, So now she's thinking, okay, well, he said, what? If he wouldn't have said anything, if he would have just said, I'm being, right, Ariat Mekudeshes Li with these silks, and he gives her these silks, so Beseder, okay, they're obviously worth a pruta. And great, she accepted. But once he gives an objective value, an objective amount, says Rav Yosef that when he says, I'll be Mekadesh you with 50 zuz worth of these silks, all of a sudden she says, wait, I don't, is this 50 zuz, is it not? And she can't really kind of go all in the same way. And therefore, says Rav Yosef, we need an objective appraisal so that, a professional, an expert has signed off on it, and she knows, okay, he was Mekadesh me with 50 zuz, I received 50 zuz, and there's there's nothing to think about. There are those who say that the machlokes even applies b'choldu. If he simply gives her silks and says, Aret Mekudeshes Li with these silks, Rav Yosef still says that they would need a professional appraisal. Rav Yosef Amar Shaveh Kesef Areru Kekesef. Rav Yosef says because monetary equivalents, such as these silks or a ring, are just like money, right? Currency themselves. Ma kesef dekayitz av shaveh kesef nami dekayitz. Just like currency is objective, right? If I give you 1 zuz, it's 1 zuz. So also we need currency equivalents, right? We need equivalents. We need, for example, the silks to have an objective, absolute value to them, and therefore we need to get them appraised so that there is an absolute value that is being given as kesef kiddushin. Rav Yosef min Aminallah. So now Rav Yosef says, and how do I know that by shaveh kesef we need to have an objective amount for them? Rav Yosef min Aminallah. The Tanya is we learn in a brayse. Mikesef miknoso. It says by an Eved Ivri, Mikesef miknoso. Bekesef unikne ve'eno nikne betvua v'chelim. So says the brayse, we learn out from the pasuk of Mikesef miknoso, Bekesef unikne, that an Eved Ivri is acquired with kesef, ve'eno nikne, he's not acquired betvua v'chelim, he's not acquired with produce, with wheat, with vessels, he cannot be acquired with those. But what does it mean that an Eved Ivri cannot be acquired with Tivua V'chelim? If you're going to say that you can't use Shaveh Kesef, right? You can only use Kesef, you can only use currency by an Eved Ivri, you cannot use Tivua V'chelim, you cannot use things that have value. But Yoshiv Gulaso Amrachmana L'Rabus Shaveh Kesef Ki Kesef. But the word Yoshiv in that pasuk, what does it say? Im Od Rabus Bashanim Lefian Yoshiv Gulaso Mikesef Gnaso. The word Yoshiv is extra, and we learn out from it L'Rabus Shaveh Kesef Ki Kesef. To say that even monetary equivalents work, and therefore you can purchase an Eved Ivri with Tvua, with Kalim. So it can't be that what the price is saying is that you cannot use Tvua V'chelim. Of course you can. And if we're talking about, well, you can't use Tvua V'chelim when they are less than a Shaveh Pruta. Well, if that's the case, Ma'irya Tvua V'chelim, Afilu Kesef Nami. But if we're talking about less than a Shaveh Pruta, well then Kesef also, you can't purchase an Eved Ivri for less than a Shaveh Pruta. So Elalav De'is Behu Shaveh Pruta. So rather, and here's Rav Yosef's proof, it must be talking about where the Kesef and Kalim, where the Tvua and Kalim are worth a Shaveh Pruta. V'cheivan delo kaitze, but because they have not been appraised and because they do not have an objective value, therefore you cannot be kona in Eved Ivri with Tvua V'chelim when they don't have an objective value. And that's what it means in the brayso that you can only use kesef, you cannot use Tvua V'chelim. You cannot use Tvua V'chelim when they do not have an objective value. That is Rav Yosef's proof that by Shaveh Kesef they have to have an objective value. V'idach. How does Rabba, who says that you don't need an appraisal, who says that they don't need an objective value, how does he understand this brayso? Hachi ka'amar, this is how to understand the brayso. B'toras kesef hu nikne ve'nikne bitoras tvua v'chelim umayninhu chalifin. Rabba says, no, you know what the Brisa means? The Brisa means that an Eved Ivri can be acquired bitoras kesef, right? In the sort of way of, in the manner of kesef, right? That you pay either with currency, either with money, or with, you can also use tvua v'kelim. You can use, things that have value. You can acquire an Eved Ivri with things that have value as well, and they would not need to be evaluated. They would not need to be appraised. And what does it mean that you cannot use tvua v'chelim? It means b'toras tvua v'chelim as a chalifin. That you can only, you have to pay for an Eved Ivri. You can't take some wheat or some vessels and do a kinyan chalifin that I guess you would give the tvua v'chelim to the Eved Ivri, and he would pick them up, and then he would become the property of the person who is being sold to. That does not work. Toras kesef tvua v'chelim does not work by an Eved Ivri. But to use tvua v'chelim as shaveh kesef, that would work by an Eved Ivri. And says Rabbah, you would not need to get that appraised. Ulerev Nachman to Amar Peris lo abdei chalifin ma'ikal meimar. But one second, so Rabbah would explain that the Brisa, when it says tvua v'chelim, it's talking about Torah's tvua v'chelim. It's talking about chalifin. But Rav Nachman says, I'm nervous that the light's going to go out. It shouldn't go out though. Alright. But Rav Nachman, who says that you can't use Paris for chalifin, which means that you can't use tvua for chalifin. So if that's the case, tvua v'chelim cannot be a reference to chalifin, because you can't use tvua for chalifin. So if that is the case, then how do you understand the Brisa when it says that bekesef hu nikne, that an Eved Ivri is acquired with kesef but not with tvua v'chelim? How does Rabbah understand that? Based on right? If you say that tvua cannot be used for chalifin, so el la'olam delays bu shaveh pruta. So rather, really, it is talking about where the tvua v'chelim are less than a shaveh pruta. And what it's saying in the Brisa is that you cannot purchase a Eved Ivri with tvua v'chelim when they are worth less than a shaveh pruta. V'dika amart. And then you ask, but if we're talking about less than a shaveh pruta, my area tvua v'chelim afilu kesef nami. And if you're going to say, wait, but if you're saying that you can't acquire an Eved Ivri with tvua v'chelim that are less than a shaveh pruta, well, the same thing would apply to kesef. You can't acquire an Eved Ivri with kesef that's less than a shaveh pruta. So lo miboya ka'amar, what the Brisa is saying, not only this, but even this. Lo miboya kesef di isbe shaveh pruta in ilo lo. Look, certainly when it comes to kesef, you can only acquire an Eved Ivri with kesef if it's worth a shaveh pruta, but any less than a shaveh pruta, it would not work. Aval tvua v'chelim, but I might think that by tvua and kelim, Ema midimekarva no asayu gomer umakne nafshe. I might say that since tvua v'chelim, you can immediately get value from them, right? Produce you can eat, vessels you can use. So I might think that actually maybe even less than a shaveh pruta, you can acquire an Eved Ivri with tvua v'chelim. Komaj malon, we're saying no, you cannot use tvua v'chelim that are less than a shaveh pruta. So okay, so what just happened? So Rav Yosef is trying to prove that when it comes to shaveh kesef, it must be appraised. He tried to bring a proof from this Brisa that mentions tvua v'chelim, and he's saying, why can't you use tvua v'chelim? Because it's talking about tvua v'chelim that was not appraised, and you cannot use that. Whereas Rabbah says, no, even if it's not appraised, it's fine. It's just talking about what the Brisa is saying is that if you have tvua v'chelim that are less than a shaveh pruta, you cannot use that. Okay, fine, but it would not need to be appraised according to Rabbah. Amr of Yosef, so Rav Yosef tries to bring an additional proof. The Tanya is, we learn in the Brisa, Egel zeh lefidyin b'ni. Tal zeh lefidyin b'ni. That this calf is going to be used for pidyon haben, right? Pidyon haben is that if you have a fellow as a firstborn son, so after 30 days, you redeem this, right? The son belongs to the kohen, and you have to redeem your son from the kohen for 5 selas. Okay. So egel zeh lefidyin b'ni. So this egel, I'm being podeh, I'm going to use this calf for the 5 selas. I'm going to, in lieu of paying 5 selah coins to the kohen, I'll give him this calf. Ta'ala zeh lefidyin b'ni. Instead of giving this cloak to the kohen, instead of giving 5 selas to the kohen, I'll give this cloak. Lo omar klum, that does not work. Egel zeh b'chomish shloim lefidyin b'ni. Ta'ala zeh b'chomish shloim lefidyin b'ni. But if he says that this calf, which has a value of 5 selas, or this cloak, which has a value of 5 selas, I will be giving to a kohen, to the kohen, to be podeh my son, to redeem my son, bino padui, that works. So we see that when there's an objective amount, then you can use that to be podeh, right, in lieu of money. But when there is no objective amount for this monetary equivalent, for the calf, for the cloak, then it cannot be used as a replacement for money. Hi pidyon echi dami. And what's the deal in the reisha when we talk about the calf and the cloak not being valid for pidyon haben? Ilema delo shavi. If we're talking about where they are worth less than 5 selas, kol kamine, then obviously you can't use them. We can't just trust this father to give something and claim that it's worth 5 selas when it isn't. Elalav afalgav deshavi. Rather, it must be that even though it is worth 5 selas, but still, but because they have not been objectively appraised and given an objective value, low, therefore they cannot be used. And that is of Yosef's proof that monetary equivalence must have an objective value, right? We said in the Seifa, right, that as long as it's been determined that the calf is 5 selas or that the cloak is worth 5 selas, then it can be used. But if it hasn't been determined, then even if it is worth 5 selas, it still can't be used. It must be objectively verified. Lo, le'olam, delo, shavi. No, you can answer and say that really it is talking about, right, when the reisha says that it cannot be used, that is talking about where it is not worth 5 selas. Uchgon dekabil koyen ilave. And I think, so this is actually a little bit confusing. Wait, let me just confirm. Yeah, it's actually like a little bit, you wouldn't think to read it this way, but I checked the article and this is actually, I have to read it because it's kind of weird. But where am I? So where am I? So the reisha where it says that you cannot use the calf or the cloak is talking about where it is not worth 5 selas, and that's why you can't use it. And the seifa where you can use it is uchigon de kavil kohen ilave, is where the kohen says, you know what? It's worth 5 selas to me. Ki Rav Kahana shakil sudra mi pei pidyon haben, that Rav Kahana took a cloak from, or a sudra is like a head covering thing. Wait, what does this say? He took a kerchief upon his head. All right. So he took some kind of a kerchief from the pidyon haben. Amarle ledidi chazili chomesh shlam, and he says, for me, it's worth 5 selas. And that's why it worked. Amar Ravashi says, Ravashi lo amaran, when we say that the kerchief could only work for the head, ela kagon Rav Kahana, it's like Rav Kahana to gaver rabahu, when we buy the sudra reisha, and therefore he needs to put something on his head. This is super interesting. So first of all, apparently it sounds like Rav Kahana is a Kohen, which is not necessarily so pasha, but anyways, okay, Tosfos has the kasha. He says maybe there's 2 Rav Kahanas. Anyways, so Rav Kahana, when he was doing pidyon haben, so he would say, look, I'm happy to accept something to cover my head with, and for me it's worth 5 selas. Okay, and that would be acceptable, as long as for him it's worth 5 selas. And then the Gemara says that when we say that, Rav Kahana accepted this thing to put on his head as worth 5 selas, that was specifically Rav Kahana. This is super interesting, I think. Specifically Rav Kahana, because since he's a Talmid Chacham, since he's an Adam Chashuv, he's an important person, he needs to walk around with a head covering, implying that just the regular people maybe didn't walk around with head coverings, or didn't need to walk around with head coverings, which is super interesting. Right? Again, right? So, Lamar Elikim of Kahana de Gavarabu, he is a great person, and he needs something to cover his head with. And therefore, if he says, look, you know what, I'll accept the kerchief because I need it, it's for me, it's worth five selas, then that was acceptable. Avokuli Alma, but everybody else who's not a Gavaraba, lo, it wouldn't be worth that amount because they don't need this head covering, or at least it's not as crucial that they have that head covering. I mean, maybe you could say that everybody would cover their head, but like certainly a Gavaraba needs to cover their head, and therefore, even something, they'd be willing even to accept something less than 5 selas as 5 selas, but maybe the other people who, maybe you could say everybody covered their head, but while everybody covered their head, they don't need to in the same way that they would accept something worth less than 5 selas as 5 selas. I don't know. But it's definitely interesting. Kihadam Marbar of Ashi, and this is a proof that for an Adam Gadol, a head covering, he'd be willing to accept at a premium. Zavin Sudrame Ime Dirab Mikobi, he purchased a head covering from the mother of Rabbi Mikovi, Shave Asara B'Tleisu. He paid 13 for something that was only worth 10, i.e., it was important enough that he'd be willing to pay more than it is worth. Okay, now we move on to a new sugya. Okay. Omer Belazar, says Belazar, his kachili bimono, vinosin lo dinar, harezo mikudeshes v'yashlim. Interesting. So says Belazar, that if a fellow says to a fellow, be mikudeshes to me with a mono, with 100 dinars. Okay. Vinosin lo dinar. And he gave her then 1 dinar. Harezo mikudeshes, she is betrothed. V'yashlim, but he just needs to pay the remainder, right? He has to pay the remaining 99 dinars. My time outcome, given to Amar law, mono v'yoiv la dinar, because when he committed to her 100 dinars and he gives her 1 dinar, kiman do Amar law almanaz dami. Basically, what he's saying is, I'm giving you, right? I'm being mikadesh you under the condition that I will pay you the remainder of the 100 dinars. As we learned to Masechta Gittin, that when a person says under condition, what he's saying is from now. So when he says, I'm going to be Mekadesh you with 100 dinars, and he gives her 1 dinar, what he's saying is, I'm being Mekadesh you right now, and I'm giving you right now 1 dinar, under the condition that I will pay you the remainder. Meisvei, but we have a kasha. His kadshi li bimono. If a fellow says, be mikudeshes to me with 100 dinars, and then he's counting them. Here's 1 dinar, 2 dinars, 3 dinars, 4 dinars, etc. If one of them wants to say, wait, actually, 1 second, I don't want to do this, I don't want to get engaged, so then they can do that, they can retract, even at the last minute, even on the last dinar, right? So he says, right, and then he starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4, he's counting out all the dinars that he's giving her. Either one of them can pull out at any point until the last dinar has been given. So we see that they are, right, that they're not mikudeshes, right? Then Rabbi Lazar had said that if he says, Hare mikudeshes li b'mano, and he gives her only 1 dinar, they're already mikudeshes, he just needs to pay the remainder. Whereas we have a brisa that's saying, no, if he says bimano, they're not engaged until the entire 100 dinars have been given, and he or she can back out so long as that final dinar has not been given. So my answer is, well, that brisa is talking about where he says bimana zo, with this mana. Because he says this mana, her intention is on the entire mana and therefore until she receives all 100 dinars, she's not mikudeshes, because in her mind what she's committing to is being mikudeshes upon receiving all 100 dinars. But fact the Gemara, no, don't tell me that the Reisha, when he's counting, is talking about when he says b'mana zo. Homi the Seifa b'mana zo, Reisha b'mana stam. As we're about to see, the continuation of the Braisa says mana zo. And therefore, if the second part of the Braisa is talking about mana zo, then that means that when it says in the first part mana and it doesn't say zo, it literally means just mana without zo. And it's saying that even though he simply says mana, still they are not engaged or betrothed, I guess, until the entirety of the sum has been received. Right? When he says mana, they are not betrothed until the entirety of the sum has been received. Unlike Rabbi Elazar, who says that once she receives the first dinar, they're already engaged. The Katani Seif, as we learn in the continuation of the Braisa, Amar la, if he says to her, "Iskachli b'mana zo, be mikudeshes to me with this mana, v'nimtza mana chaser dinar, but it was only 99 dinars, or dinar shan choshes, or there was one of the dinars was copper, Eina mikudeshes, she is not mikudeshes. Dinar ra, if it was a bad dinar, the Gemara is going to explain what that means. Arezo mikudeshes v'yachlif, she is betrothed, but just swap out this dinar ra, which we're going to explain what that is later. No, so we see that the Seifa is talking about mana zo, which implies that the Reisha is talking about mana stam, and we're saying that she's only mikudeshes upon receiving all 100 dinars. Lo Reisha v'Seifa to Amr b'mana zo. No, both the Reisha and the Seifa are talking about mana zo. Ufarushe kamefaresh, and the Seifa is coming to explain the Reisha. Rotza echad me'en lachzor, that if in the Reisha we're saying, right, iskachli b'mana, and he's now counting, and if either one of them wants to pull out, they can, as long as the entire mana has not been received. Afilu b'dinar achron, even if it's at the last minute, at the last dinar. Harishus biyado. Ketzad, how is this? Kigon de Amar lo b'mana zo. If we're talking about where he said b'mana zo v'achinami mistavra, and this also makes sense to say that both the Reisha and the Seifa are talking about b'mana zo, tisakadaitech Reisha b'mana stam, because if it enters your mind that the Reisha, the first part of the verse, is talking about just stam amana, well then the Seifa goes without saying. It's irrelevant. It's not necessary. Hashta b'mana stam lo avi kiddushay. If when he just says stam amana, her intention is on the entire mana, and they are not betrothed until the entire mana has been received. B'mana zo mibaya, is it even a question? Obviously, by b'mana zo, the intention is going to be on the entire mana, and therefore it must be that the Reisha and the Seifa are talking about b'mana zo imishum ha lo area. To which the Gemara says, well, that's not really a proof to say that the Reisha and the Seifa must both be talking about mana zo, because if the Reisha was talking about mana stam, then I wouldn't need the Seifa to say mana zo. That's not really a proof, because you could say tana Seifa ligaluye Reisha. You could say that no, the Reisha is talking about mana stam, the Seifa is talking about mana zo, and the Seifa is just coming to make it clear that the Reisha is in fact talking about mana stam. Shalotoma, that you shouldn't say Reisha b'mana zo, that the Reisha is talking about mana zo, aval b'mana stam, havu kiddushin, but if it was mana stam, then upon receipt of the first dinar, it would already be kiddushin, like Rabbi Elazar says. So Tana Seifa b'mana zo, and therefore we have the Seifa that says b'mana zo to make it clear that the Seifa is talking about mana zo, the Reisha is talking about mana stam, and even so, Michlal the Reisha b'mana stam v'afilu hachi, that even though the Reisha is talking about mana stam, lo avu kiddushin, they are not kiddushin until that last dinar is received. So you can say that the Braisa is being explicit. The Reisha is talking about mana stam, the Seifa is talking about mana zo, and in both cases, she is only mikudeshes upon receiving all of it. She is not mikudeshes upon receiving just the first dinar, and it's a kasha on Rabbi Elazar, who says that she is mikudeshes upon receiving the first dinar. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi says no, It's not a kasha on Rabbi Elazar. Mone veholech shiny dedaito akule, period. Look, Rabbi Elazar, what does Rabbi Elazar say? Rabbi Elazar says, if a fellow is mekadesh a fellow and says, Aret mikudeshes li bimana, or whatever, what does it say? Is kachali bimana. Rabbi mikudeshes me with a mana, and he gives her a dinar. Rabbi Elazar says she's already mikudeshes. Now he just has to pay the balance, the remainder. Now we have this brisa that says that if he says Aret mikudeshes li bimana, and then he starts counting, she is not mukudeshes until she receives all of it. Rav Ashi explains those are two different cases. When he starts counting, well, then her intention is on all of it, because he's saying Arei mukudeshes li b'mana, and he starts counting 1 dinar, 2 dinars, 3 dinars. So she's paying attention. She's when somebody starts counting, you count along, and she's anticipating all that he's going to be paying out all 100 right now. And because he's counting, that is why she's not mikudeshes until the end, because she's counting along with him and she's expecting, okay, she's going to be receiving all 100, and so long as she hasn't received all 100, they're not mikudeshes. But Rabbi Elazar's case, when he simply says, Arei mikudeshes li b'mana, and he gives her a dinar, so then she says, okay, beseder, I guess he's starting out with a dinar, and and they're engaged they're betrothed from now, and it's almanas. At some later point, he's going to have to pay the remainder. Okay. Tell me about this copper dinar, right? We said in the Seifa that if he says, Arei mikudeshes li b'mana zo, and one of them turns out to be copper, so they're not mikudeshes. Well, if she knew that one of the 100 of them were copper and she accepted it anyways, so what's the problem? She accepted it, that's fine. Well, it's talking about where he gave her the mana at night and she couldn't distinguish that, she couldn't tell that one of them was copper. Or it was during the day, but he gave her 100 zuz, right? Zuz and dinar are the same. He gave her 100 zuz, and among the 100 zuz, she later found that a copper one was mixed in, so she didn't notice at the time. Okay, fine. So therefore it doesn't work until he gives her the 100 dinars. Hi dinar ra'e chidami. What is this bad dinar? If it's a dinar that is unusable, for whatever reason it can't be used, so hainu dinar shanachoshes. Why should this be any better than a dinar shanachoshes, right? Which we said, if there's a copper dinar, it doesn't work. And we're saying that if there's a dinar ra, it does work. But if we're talking about, we just have to switch it, right? But if we're talking about where it's unusable, then why is that okay? So Amar Papa Kigon Dinafik Aidadchak. It's talking about where it can be used. It's not ideal, but it can be used if it needs to be used. So in that case, we said what? We said Mikudeshes, right? What do we say? Dinara rezo Mikudeshes v'yachlif. So she's Mikudeshes because he gave her 100 dinars, but one of them kind of, is not ideal. So she's Mikudeshes, but just swap out the less than ideal one. Okay, fine. That was the second chunk of today's daf. Now we are up to the third and final chunk of today's daf, which will take us to the end. Amar Rav Nachman says, Rav in the name of Nachman, Omarlo, if he says to her, fellow says to a fellow, his kachali b'mono, b'mikudeshes to me with a mono, v'niach la mashka naleh, and he leaves her with a collateral, eina mikudeshes, she is not betrothed, mono ein kan mashkon ein kan, he didn't give her the mono, the mashkon, the collateral is not a gift, it's a collateral, so there's no Kiddushin, right? So basically, if he says to her, I'm going to be mekadesh you with a mono, but he doesn't give her a mono, instead he gives her an IOU. He says, look, okay, I'm going to be mekadesh you with a mono. In the meantime, I don't have the money right now. In the meantime, take my watch, and then when I get the 100, then when I get the money, I'll give you the money, and you'll give me back my watch. So she's not mekudeshes because he didn't give her the money. He didn't give her any money, and the watch he's not giving it to her as a gift. It's just a collateral until he pays her. So therefore, she's not receiving anything, and there's no Kiddushin there. Eis v'Rav Rav Nachman, but Rav asked a kasha to Rav Nachman. Kidsha b'mashkon mikudeshes. We have a brisa that says that if a fellow is mikadesh a woman with a mashkon, she's mikudeshes. So why are we saying here that the mashkon doesn't work? So also b'mashkon da'acherim. No, that's different. That's talking about where, this fellow had lent money to somebody else, and somebody else had given him a mashkon, and he's in possession of a mashkon, a collateral, and that collateral he then gives to a woman, and he's mekadosh with that collateral. That does work. It's like Rabbi Yitzchak, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, minayin levalchov shekona mashkon. We've seen this before. How do we know that a creditor, somebody who's owed money and is given a collateral, how do we know that he takes ownership of that collateral? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, that the pasuk says that if you borrow clothing from a fellow, if you take clothing from a fellow, it's like clothing that he needs at night for a collateral, so at night you should give it back to him so that he has clothing for the night. And it'll be a very righteous act of you to do this. Now, if he doesn't own the garment, it's not much of a righteous, worthy thing for you to do. It's not yours, it's theirs. But rather the point is that he's kona mashkon, it's technically his, and still he gives it back to the fellow at night, so it's therefore a righteous thing. Mikan levalchov shekona mashkon, so we see that a creditor acquires the collateral, and therefore you can be mekadesh a woman with this collateral. But if you say, if you give a collateral to a woman as an IOU, right, she's in possession of it as a collateral until you give her the money that you promised her, well then that does not work for Kiddushin. Rav Huna bar Oven Zavun Ahu Hayi. What? Bnei Rav Huna bar Oven Zavun Ahu Amsa. So the children of Rav Huna bar Oven purchased in a shifcha, an amma. Okay, I don't know, it was an amma ivria maybe. Befrite, and they were going to pay with prutos of nechoshes. But they didn't have these copper prutas. Osivi nascha ole. So they said, look, in the meantime, as a collateral, take this silver. The sof aikar amma. In the end, the price of the amma, the maidservant, went up, and now she was worth more. And then also the comment of Rabbi, they came for Rabbi because the children of Rav Huna bar Oven wanted the original price, and they said, look, we gave you a collateral for the original price, whereas the owner is saying, no, you didn't give me anything. You didn't give me the prutas that you need to pay me with, right? And in amma, right, as we said, right, people are compared to karka in terms of kinyan, and karka is nicknamed bekesef. You didn't give me the kesef. You don't own her, and now she's more expensive. You have to pay the higher price. Amalu and Rabami says, Prite ein kan, nascha ein kan. Look, if you didn't pay the prutas that you committed to, and the silver is only a collateral until you pay, you have not acquired her, and you need to pay the higher price. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Hiskad shili bimono. If a fellow says to a fellow, Be mikudeshes to me with a mana, Natalto uzrakto layom, and she takes the mana and she throws it into the sea, or she throws it into a fire, or anything that will destroy it. Ain't mikudeshes. She's not mikudeshes, right? He's mikadesh her and she takes it and throws it and destroys it. The Gemara says she's communicating that she's not interested. Hoshtisinu kame avu kiddushin. But does that imply that only because she threw it into the sea or into a fire, that is why it is not kiddushin? But if she would throw it on the floor, then it would be kiddushin. Haka amrle shkilo ba'ina. If she throws it on the floor, even though she might not be destroying it, but essentially what she's saying is, take it, I'm not interested. So why does the Brisa specifically say if she throws it into the sea, then she's indicating that she's not interested? I mean, if she throws it on the floor also, she's indicating that she's not interested. Slomi boya ka omar. It's saying not only this, but even this. Lomi boyash di sinu kame tlavi kiddushin. Look, of course, if he gives her the money for Kiddushin and she takes it and throws it on the floor, obviously it's not going to be Kiddushin. She's clearly not interested. Aval, but Zrakto layam, but if she throws it into the sea, ola or into a fire, where if she's not interested in accepting it as Kesef Kiddushin, and then she destroys it, well then she's going to have to pay him back. And why would she want to do that? So Ema, what I would say is it wouldn't make sense for her to destroy it, because then she's gonna be mechuyeves, she's gonna have to pay him back. She just destroyed the money. So it came to Mechayva Behu, that since if she's not interested in the Kiddushin, she would be mechuyeves to pay him back. That's how I understand it. Kiddushay Kaddish Nafsha, it must be that she's actually accepting the Kiddushin. And now it's hers, and she can do whatever she wants with it, including throwing it into a fire or throwing it into the sea. So then, if now it's hers, why would she throw this money into the sea or into a fire? Savra, well, she thought, Ivdike, let me test this guy out. Lahai Gavra, Iraschonahu, Olo, let me test him out to see, does he get angry or not? Right? I'll take this money that he just gave me and I'll destroy it. Let's see what he does. Kamaj Milan is going to teach us, no. Even in that case where I might think that maybe she is accepting it and she's just testing it, no. Testing him, no. If she takes the money and she throws it into a fire or she throws it into the sea, what she's expressing is, I am not interested. And will she be chayav to pay him back? I guess so. But nonetheless, she's indicating, I don't want your money, I don't want your Kiddushin, go away. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught. Hiskad shili bimono. If a fellow says to a fellow, Bimu Kudeshes to me with a mana, Tneim la'aba u'la'avicha, and you know what she says? Give them to my father, give them to your father. Eina Mikudeshes, she's not Mikudeshes, because what she's saying is, look, I'm not interested in your money. If you want, give it to my father, give it to your father, don't give it to me, I'm not interested. Amanashi kablum li Mikudeshes, but if she says, oh wow, that's so nice of you, you know what? Don't give it to me, give it to my father, give it to your father, let them accept it on my behalf, then she is Mikudeshes. Tana Abba Lodiacha Koach de Reisha, and we mentioned her father to teach the Koach of the Reisha, that in the Reisha, when he says, Harei Mikudeshes li, and she says, I'm not interested, and she says, give it to my father, what she's saying is, I'm not interested, if you want, you can give it to my father. So even though she's mentioning her father, which you could think, she relies upon her father, she's very close to her father, maybe what she's saying is that, he would accept it on my behalf. No, what she's saying is, I'm not interested. If you want, give it to my father instead. Tana Avicha, and we mentioned your father, right, the father of the fellow, Lodecha Koach the Seifa, to teach the extent of the Seifa, his Kachili, a period. That in the Seifa, it says that if she says Amanashi Kablumli, that he says Ariyat Mikudeshes li, right? The fellow says to the fellow, be Mikudeshes to me, and she says, sure, under the condition that your father accepts the money on my behalf. So even though it's not her father, it's his father, still we're saying that works. His kachili bimono tneim lifloni, and similarly, if a fellow says to a fellow, be mikudeshes to me with amana, and she says, give them to so-and-so, Eina mikudeshes, she's not mikudeshes, because what she's saying is, I'm not interested, give them to somebody else. Amanashi kablim li mikudeshes, but again, similarly, if she says, oh wow, under the condition that so-and-so accepts them for me, then she is mikudeshes, and what she's saying is, wow, thank you very much, I'm interested, just under the condition that somebody else accepts them on my behalf. Utzricha, we need both cases, the first case of Abba v'Avicha and the second case of a random person, the Ashmu'inan Abba v'Avicha, because if we would only have the case of, give them to my father, give them to your father, Hosam hu dichi amra amenas sheyikablem li avu kiddushin, I might think that if we only had the case of my father, your father, well that is where, when she says, wow, thank you, under the condition that my father or your father accepted on my behalf, that is where it is considered kiddushin, tisamcha daita alayu, because she is comfortable with them, she feels safe with them, And she says, okay, let them accept it on my behalf. Savra avdan li shlichusoi. She figures they will do my, shlichus. Aval ploni lo. But a random person, if she says, let some random person accept it for me, that would not work. So therefore we have to say, no, even with ploni, it works if she says, let that person accept it on my behalf. V'ashminan ploni, and if we only had the case of ploni, hachahu tichi amra tneim lefloni lo avu kiddushin. I might think that, okay, specifically by this other person, when she said, if he says, is kacheli b'mana, and she says, give it to somebody else, what she's saying is, I'm not interested, give it to somebody else instead. Because she's not close with that person, to give it to them, b'matana as a gift. And therefore what she's saying is, I'm not interested, give it to them. But her father or your father, who she feels closer with, so if a fellow says, it's kadshi li b'mana, and she says, give it to my father or your father, maybe what she's saying is, great, give it to my father or your father as a gift. Therefore we have to have that case as well to say that no, if he says it's kachli b'mana and she says give it to my father or your father, what she's saying is I'm not interested, give it to my father or your father instead. Okay, fine. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbi is taught in a brayse, says kachli b'mana. Okay, if a fellow says to a fellow, be mikudeshes to me with a mano, tneim al gabe sela, and she says put them on a rock. She's not mikudeshes. V'imaya sela shelo, but if she owned the rock, mikudeshes, then she is mikudeshes. By Rebbe asks, Sela shel shnei, what if they both jointly own the rock? Teku ichveis nish. His kachli bekikar, if a fellow says to a fellow, be mikudeshes to me with a loaf of bread, tnei lekelev, and she says, give it to a dog. In mikudeshes, she's not mikudeshes. V'imaya kelev shelo, but if it's her dog, mikudeshes, then she's mikudeshes. By Rav Mari asks a kasha, kelev ratza achreo. What if she's being chased? This is an interesting proposal, very romantic. You have a fellow and a fellow, they're about to get engaged, and then a dog, a rabid wild dog, starts chasing her. Mau, and he's got his loaf of bread, and she says, give it to the dog, give it to the dog. Bahu anoyo dikomatzlo nafsha mine gomer mekanya le nafsha. So from the benefit that he's saving her life from this rabid wild dog who's chasing her, she's accepting that value as Kiddushin. O Dilma, Matzi Amarle, or maybe she could say to the fellow, look, I'm not Mikudeshes to you. Midoraisa chayuv michayeves la'atzulan. You have a chiyuv to save me. I'm not accepting Kiddushin. I'm saying, give that bread to the dog and save my life, but I'm not Mikudeshes to you. Teku uchveisnis. Just kachili bekikar, if he says to her, be Mikudeshes to me with a loaf of bread, Taneu Lu'ani, she says, give it to a poor person. Ain't mikudeshes, she's not mikudeshes. Afilu ani asamuchala, and that's even if it's a poor person who is dependent on her, right? She feeds this poor person, and she's saying, look, give the bread to this poor person who I generally feed. Still, that does not work as Kiddushin. My time, how come? Amrle, she's saying to him, look, just like I am responsible to support poor people and to give them food, look, so are you. I'm not accepting kesef Kiddushin. You have a responsibility to help this person out, and so help him out. How gavra davakam zabin chomre paskiosa. There was a fellow who was selling buttons or glass beads, things that were sold on strings and like necklace type things. And a certain fellow came along, Amrle, and she says to the fellow, Havli chad shocha, give me a string of your buttons or glass beads. Amarlo, he says to her, Yahivnolich mikadeshesli. If I give you one of my strings of buttons or glass beads, will you be mikudeshes to me? Amrle, she says to him, Hava miava, surely give it. Omar Rav Chama kol hava miava lav klumu, says Rav Chama, Hava miava is garnished, is nothing. How gavadava koshasi chamer b'chanusa. There's a fellow who's drinking wine in a store. A certain fellow came along. Amrle, she says to him, Havli chad kasa. Will you give me one glass of wine? Amarlo, he says to her, if I give you a glass of wine, will you be my betrothed? Amrle, ashkui ashkai, and she says, surely give me to drink. Amar Rav Chama kol ashkoye ashkayin lav klumu. Says Rav Chama, surely give me to drink is nothing. However, the avakos shdi tamre midiklo. There's a certain fellow who was throwing dates out of a palm tree. A certain fellow came along. Amar le, she says to him, shdili tarte, can you throw me 2 of them? Amar le, he says to her, ishadina la lich mikadeshes li. If I throw you some dates, will you be mikudeshes to me? Amar le, she says to him, shdi mishda, surely throw them. Amar of Zvid, kol shdi mishda lav klumu, says of Zvid, shdi mishda is not, doesn't mean anything, she's not accepting the Kiddushin. Ibayu de asakasha, have ashke ushdi ma. What if she didn't say hava miava or ashkui ashkayan or shdi mishda? She just said have or ashki or shdi, right? Not the double language, just a single language. So Amar Ravina mikudeshes. Ravina says she would be mikudeshes with the single term. Rav Sama bar Raksa Amar Taga de Malko. Rav Sama bar Raksa says I think he's saying I'm swearing by the crown of the king. Eina mikudeshes, that she is not mikudeshes. Now, I think the following 3 lines we're going to end at these following 3 lines, and they're also basically the summary of the daf. Be'ilchasa eina mikudeshes. The halacha is that she is not mikudeshes in these cases when, she says, give me some dates or these things, even if it's a single language. Be'ilchasa shirai lo tzrichei shuma. And the halacha is that, right, in the Machlokas Rabbah and Rav Yosef, Rabbah says that you need to evaluate these, monetary equivalents, such as the silk, or I imagine it will apply also to the rings that we give nowadays. Rabbah said we have to evaluate, we do not need to evaluate them. Rav Yosef says we do need to evaluate them. We say the halacha is lo tzrichei shuma, we do not need to evaluate them, like Rabbah. Right, we can just assume, I guess, that if you say if you say you have Mekudeshes me and you give the silk, so I imagine today you give the ring, you can assume it's worth a shava pruta, and that works. Vilchasa, I assume that that's pshat, although I can't say for sure. Vilchasa ki Rabbi Lazar, the halacha is also like Rabbi Lazar, that if he says Hayat Mekudesh Kachili b'mono, and he gives her a dinar, they're already Mekudeshes, and it's almanas, he just needs to pay the remainder. Vilchasa ki Rava Amar of Nachman, the halacha is like Rava Amar of Nachman, that if he says it's Kachili b'mono, and then he gives her a collateral, they are not Mekudeshes until he gives her the mana. Well, friends, we basically just did a review of the daf in the last few lines, which was kind of nice. So that was daf ches of Masechta Kiddushin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.